The bucket of cold water hit the floor before Alina Hartley could even set it down properly, and the sharp voice of the housekeeper cut through the kitchen like a whip. "Scrub it again," the woman snapped. "Faster this time, or you will go without supper." Alina did not argue. Arguing never worked. She had learned that lesson many years ago, back when she still believed someone in this house might treat her with kindness. Now she simply knelt, her knees aching against the stone floor, and began wiping away water that had barely spilled in the first place. The other servants watched from the doorway, whispering among themselves, careful not to let their voices carry too far. They called her the nobody girl, the charity case nobody wanted, the orphan who should be grateful just to have a roof over her head. Alina had stopped feeling the sting of those words long ago, or so she told herself. Ashcombe Manor was a grand house, filled with polished floors and tall windows, but none of that grandness belonged to Alina. She lived in the smallest room at the back of the servants' quarters, wore clothes that had been mended so many times the stitches outnumbered the fabric, and ate whatever was left after everyone else had eaten their fill. She had arrived at this house as a small child, carried in during a storm, or so the story went, though no one had ever bothered to tell her the full truth. The family who owned Ashcombe treated her more like a burden they were forced to carry than a member of their household. Still, Alina worked without complaint, because complaining changed nothing, and she had long accepted that her life would always look this way. That afternoon, everything changed in a single moment. A carriage arrived at the front gates, pulled by 4 dark horses, and the entire household stirred into a frenzy of nervous energy. Word spread quickly through the halls. The Duke of Northmore had come. Alexander Blackwood was a man known across the region for his sharp mind and his cold, unreadable expression, a man who rarely left his own estate for anyone. His visit to Ashcombe was unexpected, and the family scrambled to prepare a proper welcome, terrified of disappointing a man of such power. Alina had been sent to carry linens across the courtyard when she saw him step down from the carriage. She paused only for a moment, expecting nothing, wanting nothing, simply a servant girl passing through her day. But then the Duke turned his head and his eyes locked onto hers. For a heartbeat, something shifted in his expression, something between shock and disbelief, as though he had seen a ghost standing in broad daylight. Alina lowered her gaze quickly, assuming she had done something wrong, and hurried away before anyone could scold her for staring at a nobleman. She had no way of knowing that her entire world was about to be turned upside down. Behind her, Alexander stood frozen, his hand gripping the carriage door, his mind racing with a memory he could not explain. The girl in the courtyard looked exactly like someone he had believed was gone forever. He did not move for a long moment. He simply stared at the empty space where she had been standing, questions building rapidly in his mind, questions he intended to answer no matter what it cost him. Alexander did not sleep well that night. The image of the servant girl in the courtyard refused to leave his thoughts, pulling at a memory buried deep inside him for almost 2 decades. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a resemblance and nothing more. Yet something about her eyes and the shape of her face felt far too familiar to ignore. By morning, he had made a decision. He would extend his stay at Ashcombe Manor, despite having no real reason to remain there any longer. The owners of Ashcombe, Lord Grayson and his wife, were both flattered and unsettled by the Duke's sudden interest in staying. They fell over themselves trying to please him, offering their finest rooms and richest meals, unaware that his attention had shifted entirely toward a girl they considered beneath notice. Alexander asked careful questions during dinner conversations, questions that seemed harmless at first, about the history of the house, the staff who worked there, and how long certain servants had been employed. Lord Grayson answered smoothly, but his wife's hands trembled slightly around her wine glass each time the topic came too close to Alina. Alina herself noticed the Duke watching her more than once, though she assumed it was simply curiosity, the kind wealthy men often showed toward servants before quickly forgetting them. She kept her head down and continued her work, unaware that every movement she made was being studied closely. When she reached for a teapot one afternoon, her sleeve slipped back slightly, revealing a small, faint mark on her wrist shaped almost like a crescent moon. Alexander, seated nearby, went completely still. He recognized that mark. He had seen it once before, painted carefully into a portrait that hung in his family's private gallery, a portrait of a child who had vanished under tragic circumstances many years ago. That night, Alexander began writing letters, reaching out to old contacts and family record keepers, requesting information he had never thought he would need again. He moved carefully, knowing that if his suspicions were correct, someone at Ashcombe Manor had been hiding a truth far more serious than simple cruelty toward an orphan girl. Meanwhile, Lord Grayson and his wife grew increasingly anxious, whispering behind closed doors late into the night. They began giving Alina more distant tasks, keeping her away from the Duke whenever possible, and speaking sharply to any servant who mentioned her name near him. Alina felt the shift in atmosphere without understanding its cause. The already cold treatment she received grew colder still, filled with a strange, nervous energy she could not explain. She was moved to work in the far end of the property, tending to gardens rarely visited by guests, as though someone wanted her hidden entirely from view. She wondered briefly if she had done something to anger the family, though she could think of nothing new she had done wrong. Alexander noticed her sudden absence from the main house immediately, and it only deepened his suspicion. A family with nothing to hide would not go through such trouble to keep a servant girl out of sight. He requested a private meeting with the estate's old physician, a man who had served the household for decades, hoping to learn more about the day Alina had first arrived at Ashcombe. The physician hesitated at first, clearly uncomfortable, before finally admitting that the true story of her arrival had never quite matched what the family told others. By the end of that conversation, Alexander understood he was standing at the edge of something far larger than a simple mystery. He was standing at the edge of the truth. The old physician's hand shook slightly as he spoke, his voice lowered to barely above a whisper. He told Alexander that Alina had not simply appeared during a storm, as the family always claimed. She had been brought to Ashcombe by a midwife who no longer worked in the region. A woman paid a large sum of money to remain silent about where the child had truly come from. The physician admitted he had always suspected something troubling about the arrangement, but fear of losing his position had kept him from speaking up sooner. Alexander pressed further, asking about records, dates, anything that could confirm his growing suspicion. The physician mentioned a fire that had taken place many years earlier at a neighboring estate, a fire that had claimed the life of an infant heiress, or so everyone had been told at the time. No body had ever truly been recovered, only ashes and a story too convenient to question. Alexander's chest tightened as the pieces began falling into place. The timing matched. The birthmark matched. Even the vague description of the missing child matched the young woman he had seen scrubbing floors in the courtyard. He immediately began cross-referencing old family documents, letters, and legal papers stored within his own estate. Among them, he found something that confirmed his fear and his hope at the same time, a betrothal contract drawn up between his family and the family of the missing heiress when both children were still infants. A contract never formally dissolved because everyone believed the girl in question had died in that fire. If Alina truly was that missing heiress, she was not only a wronged orphan, she was also, by old agreement, tied to his own family in a way neither of them could have imagined. Meanwhile, Alina's situation at Ashcombe had grown unbearable. Lord Grayson's wife had become sharper with her words, practically hostile, ordering her to remain in the gardens at all hours and forbidding her from entering the main house altogether. Alina, exhausted and confused by the sudden harshness, began seriously considering leaving Ashcombe for good. She had nothing tying her to this place except suffering, and she saw no reason to continue enduring it. She began quietly gathering her few belongings, preparing to disappear into the night before anyone noticed. She did not yet know that the answers to every question she had ever carried about her own life were only hours away from finding her. Alexander arrived at Ashcombe Manor with a small group of trusted men and a folder of documents that would change everything. He requested an immediate audience with Lord Grayson and his wife, refusing to wait even a single moment longer. When they entered the drawing room, visibly nervous, Alexander wasted no time laying out everything he had discovered. He spoke of the fire, the missing heiress, the paid midwife, and the forged reports declaring a child dead who had, in truth, been alive the entire time. Lord Grayson attempted to deny the claims at first, his voice rising with false confidence, but Alexander produced signed statements from the physician and financial records showing large, unexplained payments made around the time of Alina's arrival. The evidence was undeniable. Faced with exposure in front of the same society that respected their family name, Lord Grayson's wife broke down first, admitting through tears that they had known exactly who Alina was from the very beginning, and that they had kept her hidden and mistreated to continue controlling the fortune that rightfully belonged to her. Word of the confrontation spread through the household within minutes. Servants gathered near doorways, whispering in disbelief as the truth unfolded. Alina, who had been preparing to leave the property entirely, was found by one of Alexander's men just as she stepped past the garden gate. She was brought back to the main house, confused and frightened, unsure why everyone was suddenly looking at her so differently. Alexander met her in the entrance hall himself, his expression gentle for the first time since his arrival. He explained everything carefully, watching her reaction shift from confusion to disbelief to overwhelming emotion as the truth settled over her. She was not a nobody. She was Lady Alina Ashworth, the true heiress of a neighboring estate, believed dead for nearly 2 decades. The people who had treated her with such cruelty had known her real identity the entire time and chosen to hide it for their own gain. Alina stood in stunned silence, her hands trembling, as the weight of an entirely new life settled onto her shoulders. News of Alina's true identity spread quickly across the region, reaching every household that had once looked down on her without a second thought. Lord Grayson and his wife faced serious consequences for their actions, stripped of the fortune they had stolen and publicly disgraced in front of the very society they had once tried so hard to impress. Alina, now formally recognized as Lady Alina Ashworth, watched their downfall with a strange mixture of relief and quiet sadness, unwilling to celebrate suffering even after everything she had endured. Her new life unfolded slowly, filled with unfamiliar comforts and unfamiliar responsibilities. She was given control of her family's estate, a place she barely remembered from her earliest childhood, along with a fortune large enough to secure her future many times over. Servants who once mocked her now addressed her with careful respect, though Alina made a point of treating every person in her household with the kindness she had once been denied. Alexander remained close throughout her transition, guiding her gently through the unfamiliar world of nobility without ever pushing her faster than she was ready to go. Their old family betrothal, drawn up when they were only infants, technically still stood, yet Alexander made it clear from the very beginning that he had no intention of forcing that arrangement upon her. He told her plainly that whatever happened between them should be her choice alone, not an obligation inherited from paperwork written before either of them could speak. Alina appreciated his honesty more than he realized. Over the following months, their relationship grew naturally, built on quiet conversations, shared meals, and a mutual respect that had nothing to do with old contracts or family expectations. She found herself drawn to him not because of the title he carried, but because of the way he had looked at her from the very beginning, back when she was still a servant girl scrubbing floors and had seen something worth protecting. Eventually, Alina chose to accept the arrangement between their families, not out of duty, but out of genuine feeling that had grown steadily between them. Their engagement was announced publicly, drawing attention from every corner of society, many of whom could hardly believe the same young woman once dismissed as a penniless nobody was now set to become a duchess. Alina stood tall during the announcement ceremony, dressed in fine clothing that felt strange against skin once accustomed to rags, yet she carried herself with quiet confidence rather than arrogance. She remembered every harsh word once spoken against her, every cold night spent in the servants' quarters, and used those memories not for bitterness, but as a reminder of how far she had come. As the ceremony ended and the crowd offered their congratulations, Alina glanced toward Alexander, who offered her a small, genuine smile. She smiled back, finally at peace with a life she never imagined possible, standing proudly as Lady Alina Ashworth, soon to become Duchess of Northmore, no longer a nobody, but exactly who she had always been meant to be.